Charlene Voigt was last seen in Littleton, Colorado on June 30th, 2016. Her parents last heard from her on June 29th and reported her missing on July 8th. Police found her vehicle in a dirt lot in the 5000 block of South Rio Grande Street. The property had been purchased by her boyfriend, Jeffrey Scott Byer, just days earlier. He owned a business providing dumpsters and portable toilets. After police found Voigt's car, they announced they were investigating her disappearance as a possible crime. They named the lot where her car was found and an apartment in a complex in the 5100 block of the same street as crime scenes. When police searched the apartment, they found blood spatter on a headboard, a mattress was missing, and a piece of carpet had been cut out and removed. Voigt had previously lived with Byer in California. In February 2012, she filed for a restraining order after he slapped and choked her and dragged her around the house for over 20 minutes, making her afraid for her life. Byer pleaded guilty in the domestic violence incident and served jail time for it in 2013. He had a prior abuse history in 2007. He pleaded guilty to threatening to kill his ex-wife, and she told the police he had beaten her up several times. Sometime after the domestic violence incident, Voigt and Byer reconciled and moved to Colorado. In 2015, Voigt returned to California to complete the final year of her degree in landscape architecture. After graduating in the spring of 2016, she moved back to Colorado and was living with Byer in Littleton while she completed her architectural portfolio and looked for jobs in her chosen field. On July 12th, 4 days after Voigt was reported missing, Byer was arrested for first-degree sexual assault and third-degree assault. According to the indictment in that case, on the night of June 30th, Voigt and Byer had some friends over to their apartment, where they drank alcohol and used drugs. The others stated Byer invited one of the women into the bedroom and then violently assaulted her, something witnesses heard but did not see. Earlier in the evening, multiple witnesses had seen Byer hit Voigt in the face and tell her to shut up. The accounts of the witnesses were the basis for the assault charges. In September 2016, the charges against Byer were dropped. Authorities stated that prosecuting Byer for assaulting Voigt and assaulting the other woman on the night Voigt disappeared would have hurt their investigation into Voigt's disappearance, as the victim in the assault case was one of the last people to see Voigt alive. The month that the assault charges were dropped, Voigt's parents and siblings filed for a restraining order against Byer, saying they were afraid for their lives and believed he meant to harm them. Investigators looked into Byer's activities and movements in the days immediately following Voigt's disappearance and discovered he'd withdrawn $7,000 in cash from his bank account, purchased lighter fluid, drove to an abandoned farm, and stopped by a landfill in Commerce City, Colorado. A 4-month search of the landfill didn't result in the recovery of Voigt's body or the missing mattress, but police did find several items of evidentiary value, including some of her personal belongings and the decapitated corpse of a dog, believed to be her chihuahua, wrapped in one of her sweaters. Byer moved to Russia in November 2016 and married a woman there a few months later, and the couple then had a child together. In July 2019, his new wife called the police in Littleton and said Byer had repeatedly beaten her and had brought a new girlfriend to come live with them, and so she filed for divorce. In August 2019, a Colorado grand jury indicated Byer for 1 count each of first-degree murder with deliberation, felony first-degree murder, sexual assault, and third-degree assault, and 2 counts each of attempting to influence a public servant and aggravated animal cruelty. The indictment was not released until early June 2020. Byer has been arrested in Russia, but it's unclear when he will be returned to the United States to stand trial. If convicted, he faces a mandatory sentence of life in prison without parole. Voigt's body has never been located, and her family is waiting for justice to be served. On May 3, 1992, in the small town of Shepherd, Texas, 19-year-old Natasha Ashley was celebrating a friend's graduation. What began as a night of partying and fun ended in a tragedy that remains shrouded in mystery more than 3 decades later. Natasha was described as kind-hearted, full of life, and well-liked by many. She had just graduated high school the year before and had her entire future ahead of her. That night, Natasha attended a party in a wooded area with about 20 to 30 people. There was drinking, music, and bonfires, typical for a Texas country celebration. But at some point during the night, Natasha disappeared. The next morning, a horrifying discovery was made. A car was burned to a crisp, with a body inside. Later identified as Natasha Ashley, the fire had been so intense that it destroyed nearly all forensic evidence. But strangely, there was no trace of accelerants, no clear signs of foul play, and no official explanation for how or why the fire started. Authorities initially suggested it might have been an accident, but Natasha's family and friends never believed that. Some believed she was murdered and her body set on fire to destroy the evidence. Others suggest she was incapacitated and someone tried to cover up what happened. But with witnesses being inconsistent and the crime scene destroyed, the truth remains buried. To this day, no one has been charged in connection to Natasha's death. Despite her mother's tireless efforts and public outcry, the case has gone cold. Until someone speaks up, her family is left with nothing but grief. Natasha's story is a heartbreaking reminder of how quickly a life can be taken and how justice can be delayed for far too long. As of today, her case remains unsolved. In Delaware on December 9, 2013, 17-year-old Lamar Wilmer was at home with his family in the 2600 block of North Van Buren Street when two young men knocked at the front door and asked for Lamar. Lamar's mother told him that people were at the door for him, and he acknowledged that he knew the two young men and went outside with them. Outside, they began talking and two other males joined the conversation. After about 3 to 5 minutes outside, one of the males shot Lamar with a handgun and everyone fled. Lamar ran back inside of his home and died in his living room. There has been no leads, no suspects, and no new evidence for almost 12 years. He was described as kind, athletic, and a natural protector. His case currently remains unsolved. On the evening of March 22, 1993, Carmen would visit her grandmother in the hospital with her father and younger brother, before driving them back to their home at around 10:30 p.m. According to her father, he had asked Carmen to spend the night at their home because it was already late, and he worried about Carmen driving back to her apartment alone. Carmen reportedly declined, informing her father that she had to go home and wash her uniforms before she was scheduled to work at a local Pizza Hut the following day. According to police, neighbors later reported that they had heard Carmen return to her apartment around 11 p.m. with an unidentified man, and further explained that they had heard the pair laughing and talking as they walked up the building's stairs. Further statements made by neighbors indicated to police that Carmen was attacked by this unidentified man in her apartment between 1 a.m. and 1:30 a.m. after hearing Carmen yell, "Get off me," before hearing silence and footsteps leaving the apartment at approximately 1:30 a.m. Unfortunately, no one would call the police after hearing this struggle and would instead send in a noise complaint to the apartment's office, who would leave a note on her door the following morning. On the afternoon of March 24th, Carmen's father received a phone call from the Pizza Hut where his daughter worked, informing him that she had not shown up for her last 2 shifts. After making several attempts to call Carmen, he went to her apartment. He found the noise complaint on the apartment's unlocked door and found Carmen, who had been sexually assaulted and stabbed several times, laying on the floor partially clothed. According to investigators, information gathered from the evidence found the remnants of a fast food meal and bottles of beer, which led them to believe that Carmen knew her killer. It has been confirmed that Carmen's ex-boyfriends had been interviewed soon after her death, but both men were cleared by DNA testing. DNA testing was completed early in the case. However, this testing would lead to no information. It was quickly revealed that the crime lab had sent the wrong samples to be tested after results showed that the samples belonged to Carmen, not their unidentified male suspect. At the end of August 2024, a case was filed against 52-year-old Dana Jermaine Shepard. He is charged with 2 counts of murder and 1 count of sexual assault with deadly force against Carmen. In addition, the Boone County Court charged Shepard with being a fugitive from out of state. He is currently being held without bond while he awaits his sentencing. Tragically, this case has been solved. On October 5, 2009, Ashley worked the closing shift at the local Arby's. Her mom, Tammy, picked her up and they went back home, and Ashley spent the evening watching a Green Bay Packers football game with her family. Later that evening, Ashley showered and went to bed, an ordinary evening in the Love household. At around 2 a.m. on October 6, an intruder broke into the Love home and went to Ashley's bedroom on the 2nd floor. He then shot her in the face with a shotgun while she was in her bed. Tammy was jolted awake and heard footsteps running down the stairs. Tammy got out of bed and opened her bedroom door. The intruder was standing in front of the door with the shotgun still in hand. While staring at the intruder outside her door, Tammy thought the family was being robbed, so she started to scream and said, "Take whatever you want and please leave." The intruder then ran out of the home through a door. Tammy shouted to Joe Love, Ashley's father, to go check on Ashley. He went to her upstairs bedroom and called out to her, but she didn't answer. He went into her room, which was dark. Eventually, he realized that Ashley had been shot. Ashley's murder was quickly ruled out as a robbery, as nothing had been taken from the Love home. Investigators believe Ashley was targeted, but the motive still remains unknown. Tammy Love is the only one in the household who saw the intruder that night. The intruder had a bandana concealing the lower half of his face and a dark zippered sweater or jacket. He was a Hispanic male, around 20 years old, with an average height and build. He had short, spiked black hair. Tammy believes that the intruder could have had an accomplice, but that detail from that night is difficult for her to recall. The Love family is offering a $12,000 reward for any information that leads to an arrest, conviction, or identification of the person or persons responsible for Ashley's death. As of today, her case remains unsolved. Kelsey Collins was last seen at 5:30 p.m. on May 9, 2009, when she left her home on 100th Street in Everett, Washington, to meet her boyfriend in Seattle. She planned to travel by public transportation, either the Sound Transit or the Metro. She never arrived in Everett and has never been heard from again. At the time of her disappearance, Collins was carrying only a small black purse, her phone, her MP3 player, her hairbrush, her identification, and a few dollars in cash. Her cell phone has been turned off since about 8 p.m. the day she went missing. Collins's parents divorced when she was 3 years old, and her stepfather was violent and abused her, her mother, and 3 siblings. When she was 7, her mother left the state with her and the other children and changed their names to get away from her stepfather. He is now serving a 20-year prison sentence. Collins's mother said her daughter began having problems when she reached puberty. She started running away from home when she was 12 years old, was truant from school, became sexually active, drank alcohol, and used and sold drugs. She eventually got involved in prostitution after she started dating an older man who turned out to be a pimp. She walked the streets in Seattle and in Portland and worked under several pimps. Her mother saw bruises on her and believed her pimps beat her, but Collins denied this. She was arrested for prostitution the first time at the age of 16. In 2008, Collins agreed to testify against her pimp, Donnico Tyrell Johnson, and the man was charged with sex trafficking of a minor, as was a woman, Lisa Miles. She continued to work as a prostitute, however, and was arrested again in April 2009, just days before she was summoned to testify against her pimp before a federal grand jury. She disappeared a few weeks later. Because Collins was unavailable to testify, the case against Johnson and Miles was dismissed for lack of evidence in March 2010. 3 months later, Johnson pleaded guilty to trafficking of a minor in another case involving a 14-year-old and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Miles was also charged in that case. She took a plea deal and was sentenced to probation. Collins's family believes her disappearance is connected with her court testimony and she was placed in danger after she agreed to cooperate with the police investigation against Johnson. Although she was reportedly terrified, she had not been offered witness protection services. Johnson hasn't faced any charges in connection with her disappearance, and her case remains unsolved. Jenna Van Gelderen was last seen in Atlanta, Georgia on August 19, 2017. She was house-sitting for her parents at their home in the Druid Hills neighborhood. Her parents were on a vacation in Canada. She texted a friend at 2 a.m. to say she was going to lie down. This is the last time she used her phone. She left the lights and television on in her parents' house, their elderly cat unfed, and the doors locked. She also left her makeup, shoes, and 2 phone chargers behind, but took her 2 cell phones. Oddly, an Egyptian tapestry was discovered to be missing from the wall of the home. It was removed from the frame, and a corner of the glass was cut off and then replaced. The tapestry is described as hand-stitched and 5 feet by 2 feet in size. It was a family heirloom, part of a set of 3 complementary pieces purchased by Van Gelderen's grandfather in the 1940s. But it was of little monetary value. Van Gelderen's vehicle, a dark blue 2010 Mazda 6, disappeared with her, as did the suitcase she took with when she arrived to house sit. Her phone last pinged near Fairburn, Georgia at 7:45 a.m., but her car was sighted in the northwest area of Atlanta at the same time. The Mazda was found on September 5th, 2 weeks after her disappearance, parked along DeFore Place in Atlanta, about 7 miles from her parents' home. It was almost out of gas, and the driver's seat had been pushed back to accommodate a driver taller than Van Gelderen. Her missing suitcase was inside the car, as were her shoes, wallet, and glasses, and an unidentified person's shoes and phone charger. Both of her phones are still missing. Her parents described her as a very regimented person, and stated her disappearance is completely out of character for her. About 6 months prior to her disappearance, she lost the only full-time job she ever had and was charged with misdemeanor theft after she stole $3,000 from the pet store where she worked. Her parents didn't approve of her friends, stating they took advantage of her and didn't have her best interest at heart. Her father had accessed the records for her cell phone because he was concerned about her relationships with friends, and he confronted her about her friendships. Van Gelderen was angry about this. She had moved out of her parents' home and refused to tell her parents where she was living. She also got a second cell phone, one that wasn't on her parents' family plan, so she could talk to her friends without her parents knowing. Authorities learned Van Gelderen was living in a room she rented from a friend. Her roommate told police he planned to throw her belongings out in the street, as her rent wasn't paid for September 2017. He refused to let the police search the apartment, but he has not been named as a suspect in Van Gelderen's case. Van Gelderen's boyfriend told investigators she had stopped by his house on the evening of August 18th, the day before her disappearance, and that he had broken up with her at this time. He also told them Van Gelderen was a prostitute and drug addict, something that hasn't been independently corroborated. Her only criminal record is the theft charge from her former place of employment. Although there's no hard evidence of foul play in her case, Van Gelderen's family fears she is being held against her will and her case remains unsolved.